Welcome to Chapter 7. This chapter details positive organizational behavior, and the authors submit that, and I quote, "The exciting news is that research suggests that you can enhance your life and job satisfaction by following some of the ideas presented in this chapter. You probably already understood that positivity will enhance your life and help you reach success. I'm sure all of us understand that, at least at some level. And I don't think I need research to show me that reality. But that being said, the realization that positivity is good and creating positivity is quite another matter. It's difficult as an individual, but it's more difficult to create and maintain positivity in a group of individuals or in an organization. And I'm sure you also understand that there are lots of forces pulling us to the negative side. Financial difficulties, family issues, time pressure, national and world events and problems, and on and on and on. So creating positivity is not only doing things that make people positive, but also overcoming the negatives in our environment. How many times have you, like me, woke up positive and excited about the day only to have something happen to bring us down? Same things happen in organizations. They are up and positive and ready to go, but then the economy, customer problems, lawsuits, quality problems, and on and on and on drag the organization to the negative side. Creating positive organizational behavior is part of the battle, but maintaining it is equally difficult and challenging. I agree with the authors that you can enhance your life and job satisfaction by following some of the ideas in this chapter. They're good ideas. And the authors do a good job of outlining those ideas. From an organizational perspective, I believe that implementing these ideas also presents a challenge. Therefore, I will expand the discussion from creating to implementing in organizations with my own ideas in the lecture. Want to put this in perspective? Well, as you read the material and listen to my meandering thoughts, think of your family or work group. How much better would it be if they were more positive? How difficult is it to create and implement that positivity in yourself or in your group? And how difficult is it to maintain that positivity under the pressures and stresses of the world? And what are the entities, people, and events that pull you and your group to the negative side? Just keep those questions in mind. And finally, I end up by, well, you guessed it, getting on my soapbox again with the discussion of the importance of hope. I think hope can be created, and I think hope can be destroyed. Creating hope opens the door for a positive environment. But without hope, the door remains closed, and positivity may become actually hopeless. So what creates hope for you? And just as importantly, what destroys hope for you? What do you think? Here we are in Chapter 7, studying the new and wonderful concept, positive organizational behavior. Aren't you excited? The text authors sound excited and make this sound a little bit like the second coming. Now, I don't mean to sound skeptical, well, maybe just a little, but I believe the concept is good, but getting it implemented into everyday organizations may be a bit more of a challenge than is apparent at first glance. As I read the chapter, it seemed a bit touchy-feely to me, but maybe my small bit of skepticism leans more towards businesses' reluctance to embrace new and innovative ideas rather than the credence of the concept itself. Businesses tend to adopt and accept concepts that make money rather than concepts that make us feel better while we are making money. Good theory doesn't always translate into good practice, and convincing business management that people who feel good increase our likelihood of making money is the implementation challenge. How's that for skepticism? Therefore, the author's somewhat hidden point is that when employees feel better, the company is more likely to make more money. When consumers feel better, they tend to spend more money, and I buy that, and I actually believe that. But the concept of feel better is a little too loose for pragmatic managers and leaders who are used to counting dollars and are rewarded when the dollar count is higher. For that reason, I want to talk a little bit about my experiences implementing such innovative programs. I put innovative in quotes not because of skepticism, but because concepts such as POB are innovative to most organizations, even though I think when the big words and phrases are translated, the concept is pretty basic and common sense. When people are positive, organizations are positive. When people and organizations are positive, they tend to work better. They tend to make better products, provide better services, innovate better, service customers better, etc. Surprise, surprise. I bet you knew that all along. But that is the gist of this chapter. Now, I'm not saying the authors are making it too complex in academic terms. They are explaining the concept very well and very thoroughly. But you would think that a concept that basic would cause organizations to stand in line and adopt it and shout for joy. Believe me, when trying to implement similar concepts and programs, I've heard shouting, but not for joy. So let's explore a little of this implementation dilemma from a practical perspective. During my career, I've had the opportunity to impact many organizations and change the way business is conducted. Now, I'm not talking about the accounting systems or production processes, but the internal environment and culture. I have tried to change organizations into more positive entities. I've attempted to instill POB concepts and initiatives with varying degrees of success. I've left some organizations better and some the same. Fortunately, I don't think I've left any organizations in worse condition. Now, on page 218 of the text, the authors detail two scenarios of organizations. One is very negative, and the other is very positive. They acknowledge that both realities exist and understand the need to make profitable decisions. However, in their words, they choose to emphasize the positive scenario over the negative. Traditionally, research has emphasized the negative and tried to change it. But the authors believe the way home is to emphasize those positive attributes. Instead of criticizing the negative, extol the positive. That's fine, and I think there's some merit to that. But we must also, perhaps in many cases, change or negate the negative to even have a prayer of extolling the positive. So I will let the authors explain the positives, and I'll try to add some real-world perspective. Okay, so I'll dwell on the negative a bit. Why is this important? Well, if you agree with the authors, and I do, that positive environments are just more effective than negative environments, at some point in your career, you will have to implement positive concepts to engender success. You do that in the real world, not in the research world. Not to say that the research world is not real, but we need perspective in the lab and in the light of day. So why are these simple and positive concepts met with such skepticism from leaders and managers? Well, let me give you some of the arguments I have heard and tried to deal with. Some are merely lame excuses, but some have substance and must be considered. Assume you are working in an organization that is not particularly positive. You are talking about culture change. Changing the culture of an organization is a slow process. It's certainly not something you can decide one day and implement the next. Since it takes a long time to create POB, it also takes a lot of energy from the organization and creates massive change. Culture change is hard and risky. And because it takes so long and is difficult to sustain the change through variable business and organizational conditions, people simply lose interest. In culture change, the existing culture can be a real barrier to implementation of a positive environment. If the culture does not accept change readily, creating a positive environment is an uphill battle. If the existing culture tends to believe that employees have little value and are unable to accomplish complex tasks, and believe me, some cultures believe that, a positive environment is difficult to create, let alone sustain. The belief is that we would be expecting too much from employees who have limited capabilities anyway. In other words, a new and positive environment would require more effort from employees. Now, I've already mentioned that changing a culture is a risk. Understand, that most organizations have a culture that has worked for them for many years. It's a culture that has created successes in the past, and convincing managers and employees that changing to a new culture is good goes against accepted logic. Let me give you a practical example. You've established a pattern of study in high school and college. You normally study the same or in a similar manner for every class. You've created success with that study habit. If you are struggling in a class and someone suggests you change your study habits, you will likely be reluctant to take that advice. If you take the advice and it doesn't work, you can fail the class. That's risky. You will likely fight the change and keep your old tried and true habits. They have proven themselves in the past. That's how organizations look at changing cultures. It is not a risk easily taken. Changing to a positive environment requires positive people. And let's face it, not everyone is positive and optimistic. Negative people often resist a change to a positive environment. They may believe it is false or even impossible. And one person's positivity is an irritant to another person. And you can't necessarily change negative people into positive people. So what do you do then with all those negative people? Also, changing an organization to a positive environment or a more positive environment may present a threat to authority, power, and status. And what's obtained, people do not like to lose power, status, or authority. And also keep in mind that often change to a positive environment is difficult because managers and employees may not view the current environment as negative. They view it as normal. Why change from your normal to an untested, perceived positive, or change from normal to what someone else perceives as positive? Remember, we all view the world differently. And finally, HR in some organizations have a reputation of changing how things are done frequently. Seems like every year or so, management comes up with a new idea or initiative and forces it on the organization. They often fail and fall by the wayside and are soon forgotten. Therefore, culture change to a positive environment becomes just a new flavor of the month. It too will soon go away. All of these factors make culture change difficult. It takes a long time to create culture change in POB. The existing culture can be a barrier. Not everyone is positive, and you can't make them that way. It's a risk. You must overcome the certainty of history. We are expecting too much from employees who have limited capabilities in the views of some managers. Threat to authority and power and status is apparent. It requires a risk on the part of the employee, and it's just another flavor of the day. Now, couple these factors with the fact that the real priority is making money and not making change, and implementation is a real challenge. Now, all of this is not intended to be discouraging, but a real picture of implementation difficulties that must be overcome. Understand that good ideas and new concepts are exciting to those who develop them, understand them, and promote them. They're not nearly as exciting to those who will be subject to them. Patience is not only a virtue, but a necessity when changing organizations. Let me take a few minutes to review a few points from the text and perhaps add some clarity or expand for a little different perspective. Remember, I'm not going to repeat the text, but just dabble here and there. If I don't cover something in the lecture from the text, it doesn't mean that that topic is not important. It just means that I saw no reason to dabble. The text defines positive organizational behavior as the study and application of positively oriented human resource strengths and psychological capabilities that can be measured, developed, and effectively managed for performance improvement in today's workplace. Now that's a mouthful. I actually got a little dizzy saying it. Talk about run-on sentences. But what does it mean? Well, maybe our understanding will be enhanced by focusing on figure 7.1 on page 219. Turn there and take a look at it. To summarize the illustration, good stuff in, good stuff out. Positive inputs in the form of emotions Mindfulness, psychological capital, and organizational culture and climate enhances group and team performance. It enhances organizational performance, and it allows us to flourish. Figure 7.2 digs a little deeper and concludes that positive practices in organizations amplify or enhance positive outcomes. They buffer against the negative events that we were talking about earlier, and they attract individuals towards the positive and away from the negative, therefore reducing the impact of negative events. All of that makes sense to me. It's one of those things that when you read it, you say, I knew that. During my career, I've always believed that positive inputs enhance positive outcomes. That's true for organizations, individuals, pets, consumers, parents, spouses, etc., etc., etc. I guess from an organizational standpoint, we have just recently engaged in active research on the subject and have recently been able to make some conclusions. But I'm sure you have found these conclusions to be true in your life as well. Positivity leads to positivity. There are a couple of questions that come to mind when we consider this for us to consider and discuss related to creating POB in addition to the implementation issues I raised previously. First, is this situational? In other words, is success a useful prerequisite for the positive input and positive outcomes? In my experience, it is much easier to find and utilize positive inputs when the organization is successful. It's much more difficult when the organization is in trouble. Not impossible, but just much more difficult. I have worked in many organizations that experienced significant business downturns. During those times, the entire organization seems focused on the state of the business. Cost cutting, potential layoffs, desperately finding customers, open positions go unfilled, etc. It is difficult to find the positive in those situations. Certainly, a positive organizational culture and climate will help dissipate the negative in such a situation, but it's still negative. It is hard to put a positive spin on such events. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, as the old saying goes. The pig always shines through. Let me generate a list of questions for your consideration. How do we generate positive outcomes in negative times? Is success a precursor for positivity? Can POB be created in bad business and organizational situations? Can people be positive even when the organization is failing? Actually, can an organization be highly positive and fail at the same time? Think of this. Is dissatisfaction and negativity necessary for progress? Do we need dissatisfaction, which could be considered negativity, to have progress? If everything and everyone is positive and satisfied, is anyone willing to change and take the associated risks to prosper? Refer back to my discussion on the implementation challenges above. Another way to think about this is, do we want to destroy negativity or do we want to nurture it into constructive action? And I'm sure there are many more questions as you read through this chapter, but let's think about these during the chapter and lecture and throughout the rest of this course, actually. We will discuss these issues in the discussion forum, but I want you to start thinking about them now. On page 222, the authors introduce conscious capitalism as one method of generating positive inputs and outputs. They list 4 key principles to have a higher purpose beyond profit maximization. They emphasize stakeholder interdependence, and they emphasize conscious leadership and a conscious culture. Now, I must admit that I fully agree with the authors on this point. These principles, when implemented in the organization, strengthen the organization in large measure. However, as I previously stated, implementation is a challenge. Getting organizations to look beyond profit maximization is even more of a challenge. Part of the problem with publicly traded companies is that the organization may look beyond profit maximization, but shareholders and boards of directors are focused on profit maximization. Managers and executives are held accountable for profit maximization and rewarded for profit maximization. They are not rewarded for changing to POB unless it leads to significant profit maximization in the near term. How do we get around that? By the way, what constitutes positive inputs anyway? The text addresses this definition during the chapter, but do positive inputs vary from one organization or one situation to another? How do we recognize positive inputs? My guess is that positive inputs should, at some point, be identified, defined, and explained to employees. What do we expect from them? I do believe that positive inputs change from organization to organization and situation to situation. That doesn't mean that positive inputs are impossible to achieve. It just means that everyone should be singing from the same songbook. Let me give you an example. Most companies state that they value all customers equally. Most companies ascribe to the principle that customers are valuable and important. Even though we all know that some customers are more valuable than others, most companies would not admit such a reality publicly. Therefore, criticizing customers and calling some unimportant and low value could be considered a negative input. I worked in an organization that changed from the above culture to one that stated openly that some customers were more valuable than others, and they proudly treated those customers differently. Even to the point of telling some customers that their business was more costly than we were willing to absorb, so they should seek the product elsewhere or expect to see a price increase to make the business profitable. Given that scenario change, is catering to every customer's whim a negative input? Is criticizing some customers a positive input? In addition, is openly criticizing and challenging management decisions a positive or a negative input? Depends on the organization. People need to understand what is considered positive and negative. You see, one of the key premises of POB is to catch people doing something right and rewarding or commending them rather than always catching people doing something wrong and criticizing and punishing them. Emphasizing the positive is the stated premise of POB according to the text. We can't catch people doing things right if we and they don't know what is right. And that purposeful attention to what is right leads us into a discussion of mindfulness and mindlessness. Simply put, mindlessness is daydreaming or not thinking about your surroundings. Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose. Now, the author would probably agree, but add that mindfulness and mindlessness are much deeper than paying attention or not paying attention. And they would probably be right, but that's really the simple definition. That hopefully provides some clarity. But mindfulness and mindlessness are important concepts in any organization. Have you ever dealt with employees of organizations who suffered from mindlessness? They are indifferent, not helpful, and prone to errors. On the other hand, have you dealt with employees of organizations that suffered from mindfulness? They are attentive, competent, and helpful. Which would you prefer? From a different perspective, I can handle the window clerk at the local theater being afflicted with mindlessness and a little consequence. But how about my physician's nurse or the physician themselves? How about the school bus driver or an EMT? You see, most accidents in organizations are the result of mindlessness. You get the picture? Instilling mindfulness is critical to organizational success, and in my opinion, more difficult to create than we think. On page 232, the authors list the benefits of mindfulness. As you can see, mindfulness presents great benefits for individuals and organizations. It's important. Finally, I want to provide emphasis to the topic of hope, covered by the text on page 235. The authors quote Fred Lutyens in his definition of positive psychological capital and state that the characteristics of PSYCAP are hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. And the text gives you a definition of each one of those, and I'll let you read that. But I want to focus on hope because I believe it is the key to achieving a positive environment. In my mind, it is difficult to obtain efficacy, resilience, and optimism if there is no hope. With hope, these three traits can be created, maintained, and optimized. I don't know what all of the research says, but that is merely my opinion and something I present to give you a different perspective and give you something to think about. The authors define willpower as the determination to achieve a goal and way power as the need to see more than one way to achieve that goal, and those create hope. I believe this concept is one of the most important discussed in this text. It is important for individuals and organizations. People need hope, and people need goals, and people need a means of achieving those goals. I believe we see the deterioration of hope in our country today. People have lost hope because they may have goals, but they lack the alternative paths to achieve those goals. People feel helpless. People feel that they are politically isolated, regardless if their beliefs are from the left or the right. Therefore, they lose hope, and when that happens, people become indifferent. We see a lot of indifference in our nation today. Now, let me climb down from my political soapbox and actually climb up on a different soapbox and focus on individuals. Have you ever met or do you know individuals stressed with physical or mental handicaps or disabilities? Do you know people who are blind or disabled and who have overcome those obstacles to do more than anyone ever expected? Have you ever attended a session of the Special Olympics? I have, and I can tell you, those folks understand hope. They understand goals, and they understand creating multiple avenues to accomplish goals. And that knowledge and understanding is both amazing and inspiring. You see, I have a granddaughter who was born with brittle bone disease and was born with over 30 fractures throughout her body. Some were healed in the womb, but caused her arms and legs to be bent and deformed. As a baby, she would fracture her ribs when she got the hiccups. Imagine that pain and that limitation. Her and her parents' dream was to be as normal as possible and to walk. I won't tell you the entire story, but over the years, they devised multiple ways to achieve mobility, including a wheelchair. She's now a teenager, and she still uses her wheelchair, but she also walks with a walker and with crutches and has taken limited steps without assistance. She's still in imminent danger of fractures and has experienced many, but also she experiences more hope than pain. You see, I learned much from her about people and organizations. Success is impossible without hope. Hope is impossible without goals and a means of realistically reaching those goals. My previous discussion about the pains of implementation are true. The cure for implementation woes, in my opinion, and changing any organization from what it is to a culture of POB is simply to instill hope. Set positive goals and inspire people to reach for them. Take away the obstacles, including obstructive management, and give people multiple avenues to achieve the goals. Give people hope that there is something better than the status quo. Hope is the key, in my opinion. Actually, it's more than my opinion. I know it because I've seen it. Look around you to those who have achieved success. It began with hope. Your quest for a degree began with hope. You set goals and created multiple avenues to achieve that degree. And if you continue to cultivate the determination to achieve the goal, you will do so. Organizations are like people because organizations are people. And do you know what prohibits hope and destroys hope? The same entities that create and nurture hope. People. Read and study the text material on psychological capital, organizational values, leadership, engagement, relationships, etc. Again, I'll not repeat them. Think of them in terms of people and organizations you know or have known. Also think of these concepts in terms of how they will instill or destroy hope in both individuals and organizations. Once again, my soapbox consumes me, but I did feel that the topic of hope was somewhat underplayed by the text and should receive more emphasis. I hope I was able to instill that emphasis. And if you feel I overplayed the topic, Please state such in the discussion forum and let's discuss it. And in the meantime, think about what creates hope for you, what destroys hope for you, and how can you instill hope in others.